Welcome to the Fit Vegan Podcast, the show where we help you optimize your health, fitness, and mindset on a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. My name is Maxime Sigouin. I am a former triathlete, powerlifter, bodybuilder, and basketball player, and I've been vegan for over 9 years. I'm also the founder and CEO of Fit Vegan Coaching, which has helped over 500 vegans from 20 different countries to completely transform their bodies and their health. I'm excited for you to hear today's episode. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fit Vegan Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest that I'm really excited to record with. We have Rip Esselstyn. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really, really well. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, well, excited to chat with you. And just for the people, in case they're not familiar with you, which I highly doubt, but you're the founder of Plant-Based, Plant Strong and Engine 2. You're the host of the Plant Strong podcast, the author of Plant Strong and Engine 2 books. So Diet, 7-Day Rescue Diet, Cookbook, are featured in Forks Over a Knife, which is ultimately where I heard of you the first time. That basically made me go vegan. You're the executive producer for Game Changers, and you have an incredible athletic background through swimming and triathlon on a world-class level. And obviously, you were a firefighter at one point. I know you're retired. So I'm very excited to chat with you today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So obviously, I haven't seen the Forks Over a Knife in a really long time. Basically, since the first time I saw it, that's the last time I watched it because that sealed the deal for me. But I'm kind of curious, just an overview of like what made you go vegan originally and what was so appealing to you? Because I know the story of when you're in the firehouse, but there had to be something before that.
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I think you need to annually, every year, you need to rewatch Forks Over Knives.
Perfect. I will rewatch it.
Yes. Yes. It truly is amazing what that documentary has been able to do. It came out in 2011. I think it was May 2011. And it single-handedly, up until the Game Changers, moved the needle, I think, more than anything else to help get people, if not diving in, at least, conversing about the power of plants. And, the transformation that's experienced in this country to me since I wrote my first book, The Engine 2 Diet, in 2009, to where we are now in 2022 it's really, to me, it's nothing short of phenomenal. And I think that, we truly are reaching a tipping point to where the plant-based lifestyle, plant-based foods, plant-based for the planet, plant-based to raise our level of, kindness and compassion is becoming more and more mainstream. So, as we talked before we jumped on here live, this is, I think, what you're doing, what I'm doing, what you mentioned their names, Dr. Clapper, Chef AJ, the list is becoming just phenomenally large now. But what we're all doing collectively to help people see that this is a lifestyle that has so many wins that, we want you to see what we see, because not only your health, but the health of and the existence of this planet depends upon it. But so that being said, how did I get into this, and why am I so passionate? It all goes back to the work of my father, and the groundbreaking, revolutionary research that he did at the Cleveland Clinic back in 1984, when this was considered, nothing, short of quackery. Oh my God, you mean to tell me that you can change what you eat and it might have an effect on, the fatty lesions and the cholesterol deposits and the blockages in your arteries? Come on, there's no such connection. And, today we know, yes, there is such a connection, and it is as profound as, smoking cigarettes and lung cancer. So, my father is a man that I've always cherished and adored and respected to the moon and back. And so I was first in line when he started his research. So he was a surgeon, And so he, every other Monday, he took off of doing surgery to do this research. And he started it, like I said, in 1984. And, it was ongoing with these initial 22 patients until he retired from surgery in, I believe it was 2001, 2002. And so for almost, 15, 16 years, he held these patients by the hand and to ensure that not only they succeeded, but to let them know that he had their backs and he would be there to support them through thick and thin. And it's spectacular what happened to these original 22 patients. But to see what happened to these walking dead, and the fact that, they didn't die within a year, as, their expert cardiologist had basically told them would happen. And they were alive 5 years later, 10, 15, 20 years later, all because of the power of a whole food, plant-based, lifestyle, and what that can do to halt the progression of this disease that was killing them. In many cases, reverse it. And it gave them their lives back. I mean, I don't think anybody listening to this podcast can understand how sick these patients were. I mean, these men, for example, they were on cardiac disability. They were in wheelchairs because if they would try and stand up, the angina pains were so hard, intense in their chests, that a couple of these guys, they had to put nitroglycerin paste on their chest just to shave in the morning, because this motion right here was too much for their hearts.
Wow.
And so imagine a year and a half, 2 years on the program, and now you're out of your wheelchair. You have no more angina pains. You're playing tennis, you're dancing, you're walking the malls with your wife. You're one of them was an avid hunter and he went hunting, but he never, shot anymore. But I mean, just imagine, the kind of impact that could have on your life. So I got to hear the stories. I witnessed it. And so that was my, kind of introduction to this whole lifestyle. It was my father and his research with these walking dead patients of his.
Yeah, and so it was a very long study. Like, at one point, where you're like, I'm going to do this also. Was it when he first originally started the study? Because I'm sure your dad kind of started at the same time as he started the study for his transition.
Oh yeah, no. When he started with these original patients in 1984, that's when he looked at my mother and he said, "Ann, if I'm going to ask these patients to do this, then I think it's really important that we do this as well, so we understand exactly, what they're going through and how to make this lifestyle work." But no, I didn't have the luxury of jumping into the lifestyle quite yet. I was a sophomore at the time at the University of Texas at Austin. I was on a swimming scholarship there. And so I was eating at the athletic training table with the football players, the basketball players, the tennis players. And the menu there was not at all plant strong.
Yeah.
No. It was, it was chicken fried steak. It was burgers. It was spare ribs. It was, grilled cheese sandwiches, all the soft serve ice cream that you could possibly want, apple pies, pecan pies. I mean, everything was dripping in, oil and Crisco and grease, but we didn't know any better back then. And so it wasn't until I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in actually December of 1986 that I launched into this lifestyle. So I say I started in January of 1987.
Okay. Yeah, definitely relate to the university aspect of, like, when you're younger and playing sports, you're just thinking of calories. Let me just eat whatever I can because I can't eat whatever I can, and I'm just gonna burn through it, and it won't affect me. Um, and so, were you still swimming competitively at that point when you transitioned? Were you still, like, very much into the athletics, or was that kind of like a pause in your athletic journey?
So I graduated in 4.5 years. And so I had a 6-month pause in my athletic kind of career from, let's see, yeah. So I graduated in May, or I stopped competing really in May of 1986, and I didn't start competing again in a new sport, which was triathlons, until January of 1987. And so that's when I started eating this way, is when I started my new kind of what would become my new career path with triathlons in early 1987.
And so I'm curious, was there any fear in transitioning? Because back then there was even less proof of athletes being plant strong compared to today. What was there any fear in potentially losing some athleticism, losing some muscle mass, some stamina? Because there was the whole belief of protein and recovery is strong today, so it must have been even stronger back then.
Yeah. I didn't have much to go by, other than there was a guy named Dave Scott who had won
Okay, yeah,
the Hawaii Ironman triathlon 6 times. And
yeah,
because I was just getting into the sport, I mean, I wasn't any good in the beginning. I mean, that's not true. I was good, but I was an age group triathlete for the first, for my first probably 15 races. And the way it works is, once you get a top 10 overall in 3 different races, you then are eligible to get your pro card to become a
mhm,
pro. And so my first professional race ever was the Chicago International Triathlon in August of 1987. Remember, I started in January of 1987. So in August, I competed in my first professional race, and I ended up getting 9th place out of 4,000 competitors, and earning a check for $900. And I was over the moon and excited. But along this journey, I would gobble up everything that I could. And remember, back then there was no internet, so
yeah,
you didn't have the luxury of kind of putting in, how do I feel myself for a triathlon. And so I was reading all the triathlete magazines that were out there and Inside Triathlon. And this guy, Dave Scott, just kept popping up. And he was like this really hardcore vegetarian, so hardcore that, he, when he would have cottage cheese, he would rinse it off first in the sink to get all the excessive fat off of it.
mhm,
But I figured, listen, if this is really good for my father's heart patients, and for the most part, it's good enough for the number one endurance triathlete on the planet, then it's got to work for me. And
mhm.
for the most part, I never had any, I never had any issues as far as um, energy. I mean, if anything, I recovered incredibly well. I found my ideal weight. I'd say the one challenge for me was, especially when I started, the couple times that I trained for an Ironman, is eating almost became a fourth sport.
Yeah,
Training for a fourth sport, right? Just to keep up the calorie consumption. And I wasn't a fan of drinking a lot of my calories back then. And I'm still not, for health reasons, but I think for athletes that are consuming, crazy amounts of calories, there's a time and a place for it, no doubt
yeah.
about it. Yeah, so you're right. Going back to your original question, there was not a blueprint for, a plant-based athlete back in the late 1980s.
Yeah, you were building the resources as you were basically progressing along.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah. Were you
So
even born then?
what year?
What year were you born?
93.
Yeah, you weren't born. Yeah,
Yeah.
you weren't born for, I mean, yeah, you were up on that star waiting to slide down for 6 years.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you basically you were building a resource. I'm curious, what distance did you compete in? Because I've competed quite a bit in triathlon and Ironman as well.
Yeah. So my specialty was the Olympic distance. So it was the
Okay.
international distance, which was a 1.5K swim, 40K bike, and then a 10K run.
Yeah, yeah. Those are fun races.
They're
Um,
fun races. I mean, it was, I think my best time at that distance was like an hour 47, an hour 48. And, you're redlining it almost the whole time,
oh yeah,
compared to
heart
a
rate
half
is
Ironman or an Ironman. Yeah.
yeah, heart rate is high the whole way through. There's no break. Even your transitions, you're rushing.
It is bloody intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, there's a lot of triathletes that follow me because I was in that sport for a very long time. What did your nutrition look like throughout the years that you were competing? Like, was there an emphasis on protein? Was there an emphasis on like having an awareness or a tracking of your calories to make sure you fueled yourself enough? Like, what was in your head every time you were eating to make sure that you had what you needed?
You know what? The only thing that I did to track to make sure that I was getting enough of everything I needed was just I tracked my weight. And
Okay.
I've never been kind of a gadgety, gimmicky kind of guy. So I don't have any apps. I don't wear any rings to track, my sleep and, what's how many hours am I getting of the deep sleep and all that stuff. I don't count my steps during the day. I don't count my calories. I don't do any of that stuff. And so I would always just I'd eat until I was, felt full, and I would eat copious amounts of, like oats and beans and whole intact grains and all kinds of, leafy greens and squashes and potatoes, sweet potatoes like they were going out of style. Um, Casseroles, rice and beans. I would probably have my Rips Big Bowl cereal, which is a combination of extra thick Bob's Red Mill oats, bite-sized shredded wheat. Back in the day, it was the Uncle Sam's wheat flakes I would use, and then also Ezekiel 49 nuggets or grape nuts. And I would take a combination of all those packages, put them in a big container, and I would have that with some sort of a plant-based milk, a couple pieces of fruit, and some seeds and nuts twice a day, like a big honking bowl of
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to me, I mean, it was nothing special. It was just I was eating whole food plant-based and making sure my weight was right between 168 and 172. And then I knew I was golden. There was a period there when I first started and I was training really, really hard and I wasn't eating, and I got down to 159.
Oh wow. That's a yeah, significant difference.
159. And I'm a sliver short of 6'2". So, and my body fat was probably down at, 3%. I was lean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was running really, really well, but,
Power on the bike.
power on the bike definitely, wasn't quite there as much. So I loved how I felt and how I performed at between 168 and 172. That was my sweet spot. But I'll just go back to, you look at, and I maybe keep in mind, I was a full-time triathlete from 1987 until 1997. And then I continued to compete at a world-class level in the Xterra triathlons until 2005. And when I was a firefighter, I still, trained because on my off days, that's what I would do. But that was a long time ago in retrospect, so 2005 is when I kind of stopped training full time. That's almost 16, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's probably could be a lot of advances that have been made in, tracking different things, but I never tracked how many grams of protein am I consuming. I mean, one day I probably figured it out, and I was like, oh man, I'm like 95, 100. I'm golden, and that wasn't even a big eating day. But you look at, like, for example, some of the best endurance athletes on the planet, like the Tarahumara Indians, they're not following an app, right? They're just eating, corn and berries and grains and, they, and corn tortillas. I mean, they keep it drop dead simple. So that to me very much suited my personality, was just keeping it simple. I didn't do a lot of the heart rate monitor training and stuff like that.
The
For
zone
me,
2 trading.
I was much more about the feel,
Yeah.
the feel. I'm trying to really tune into my body, and listen to it.
Yeah, which I think there is something to that, right? It's basically referring to kind of like what people will now call intuitive eating, right? Just being
Yeah.
more in tune with your body. Like I do have the Oura ring and I do have these things, and yeah, there is a kind of a dependency of like, how do I feel today? And then you look at the metric of like, oh, this is how I feel today. And so
Right. Yeah.
being able to take breaks from it and or to not wear it, there's a lot of benefit to that, and being able to go back to being in tune with your body, because I feel like as we progress with tech we get more disconnected, because it's
Yeah.
like, am I hungry? Well, let's see if the app tells me if I'm hungry. Did I sleep well? Should I feel good today? Let me see if the app tells me if I feel good today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But like back when I was doing the sport, we didn't really have, or I never got it. Especially, I could have towards the tail end when I was still a firefighter, but like, how many watts am I pushing, and,
yeah.
wattage and things like that. That wasn't even a thing back for me in the 80s and the 90s. But I could see the merit to that and understanding that, and, how fluid is your pedal stroke, and what
Mhm.
kind of, watts and amps can you push, to where you're just maximizing your efficiency.
Yeah.
And there was nothing I love more than that easy speed, right? Whether it was in the pool, on the bike, or in the run, where you felt like you were flying yet floating at the same time. It's almost like an outer body experience where, you're like, oh my God, I can do whatever I want today. This is like, and that's kind of almost what I kept chasing after, was that riddle of, how can I put together the best swim, bike, and run ever, and have it be that easy, kind of relaxed speed. And it was very elusive.
And it's really a beautiful feeling to be in the pool and to just be gliding and be in the zone. Like every stroke you can feel the water and you're just gliding through, and it's effortless.
Yeah.
Swimming was my favorite one for that. Just gravity's gone, you're just gliding through. So yeah, really happy we chatted about triathlon, because it's such a big part of my life, and I was curious as to how you did it before, like
Yeah.
the wattage pedals were out, before the bike computers and the Garmin. And yeah, I think there's merit to intuitive eating, and it's definitely something that I feel like more people are going back to, because it just makes it more fun and it's less stressful from a data
Mm.
perspective. um I love to chat about the transition that people go through when they go from whatever diet they're eating right now to eating more plant-based. You've helped probably thousands of people at this point. And so I'm curious as to, I want to explore the positive and negative. Like, what are the biggest limiting factors that you see preventing people from making the switch, before we dive into like action plans?
Hmm. Well, probably the biggest limiting factors are their preconceived notions of what it means to, go plant-based, to go whole food plant-based. And then, once you can take down those barriers, it's the limiting factors are probably people's family, friends, and coworkers that are putting something else in their ears, like, what are you doing that crazy thing for? And, obviously we've all heard it a jillion times, where you get your protein. And I heard about a guy that went plant-based, and this happened to him. So I think it's kind of trying to bifurcate out all the misinformation and the noise that's out there about it. Is, I would say, that's like the number one limiting factor. I work, when I do my retreats, especially our live retreats. We have one in Sedona, Arizona, and we have one in Black Mountain, North Carolina. People are hungry. We don't have to twist somebody's arm about the lifestyle. Typically,
Yeah.
they're either beginning it, or they're veterans, and they're just looking for a major tune-up.
Yeah.
And and they need a little bit of they need support. They want to be surrounded by people that are also after the same thing that they are, and we just have an absolute blast. So I'm not again. So in that setting, I'm not having to twist anybody's arms. Now, listen, I spent 12 years as a firefighter in the most unfriendly environment ever for somebody that's eating plant-based. You should, if you could only be the fly on my shoulder when I walked into Fire Station 1 as a rookie, and these veteran firefighters said that the last, and they, I don't think even they knew what a vegan was, right? And I didn't even use that term. I think I said, plant-based, but they were like, yeah, the last vegetarian that came through here didn't even last 3 shifts, right? And so much of that culture is around eating with the gang and contributing, whether it's, cooking, shopping, putting in funds at the end of the meal so that everybody's square. And so that was tough, but I was 34 when I joined the Austin Fire Department. And so I wasn't going to succumb to the pressure. Like there's some other guys that they would do a rotation through Fire Station 2, and they got to see how we were eating as a fire station. And then they would go out to another station and they'd say, Rip, the pressure is just too much. I just want to get along. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be a sore thumb. So I'm just doing whatever these guys are doing. And I'm like, hey, that's fine. You don't have to like justify it to me. But I have gotten in many, I've learned, I was in so many different shouting matches with, these morons about, what's healthy, what's not healthy, and I say morons in a very, very loving sense, because I ultimately loved all these people that I worked with, but things could get very heated. So I'm kind of coming back around to your original question. I think the most limiting thing, especially for men, is this whole notion that real men eat meat. And that is such a crock of crap. And the reality is that real men, they do their research. They don't go with the, go with the crowd, and they do the right thing by themselves and their families and the planet, and to be kinder, more compassionate, men. And so I always like to say that real men eat plants. You brought up when we started this conversation, forks over knives, right? I have that iconic scene where I'm climbing the fire pole without my legs saying real men eat plants. And to me, it is so absolutely true. And I love it when I'm like, for example, out to dinner with somebody and they are trying to figure out what to do. And they just say, you know what, I'm going to have what you're having, Rip, because I totally, I trust that you know exactly what you're doing. And these are people typically they're carnivores, they're meat eaters. And so I really appreciate and applaud somebody that's that open-minded, that instead of putting a stake in the ground and doing just the opposite of what I do, right? They're like, you know what? Let me give that a whirl and I'll have exactly what you're having. Just order 2 of those. So the limiting factor to me is the preconceived notions about what it means to be a man. Most women, they get it, right? Most women they don't have to impress anybody. Their egos are good.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because I actually had it on my list of questions for you, because you transition at a time where eating plant-based wasn't what it is today, where it's a little bit more, I would say, socially acceptable now, and being in an environment of athletes and firefighters is very masculine, strong energy. And to be the guy that's like, hey, I'm doing this and I'm not eating a piece of steak or chicken tonight to like fuel my body. I was curious as to how you dealt with that. But you brought up a good point in when you're sitting at the dinner table with them, they're also outside of the environment of having other multiple men that are there putting peer pressure. And I find that most men, I come from the bodybuilding powerlifting world. I used to be 240 pounds. Like you ate like steak for breakfast, a dozen eggs for breakfast. Like that's what I used to do. If you grab those people one on one, they're more than open to
Yeah.
listening and receiving. It's just if there's other guys around, it's game over because then peer pressure comes in and you're like, oh, I'm not gonna try this thing. I'm not gonna try this tofu scramble. But yeah, one on one, they're more than receptive.
Very, very much so. And a lot of times what would happen is, um, especially in the beginning, before we had our whole station on the C shift go plant-based, is the guys after a big old meal, they'd be eating their whatever, and I'd be eating my, rice and beans or my cheeseless pizza. They'd pull me aside and then ask me questions and tell me about their high cholesterol or, the incidence of heart disease that runs in their family or diabetes. So, and then it was like, once they come to you, it's like, hey, you knew that was a
Yeah.
great spot to be in. But no, that's a good point you bring up. Yeah, you definitely got to pick your time and your place to try and sell the lifestyle.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like for women, like you mentioned, it's a little bit of an easier transition. If there are a group of them, there won't be that pressure. But men, it's a tough one. If you're at a restaurant with like 10 of them, like it's game over. One's gonna say something, and everyone's gonna chime in, and then it makes it harder to
Yeah.
not say prove your point, but say what you have to say.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is every one of those situations has to be dealt with in a very nuanced and kind of cagey way, depending upon, you got to read the situation, you got to read the players that are around the table, and then you decide, am I going to go for it and like
Yeah,
really like disrupt everything that's going on here and see how many guys here I can like sway, and I'm going to be swinging, right? I mean, we're going to be getting into it. Or do you decide, you know what, this isn't the time or the place. This isn't,
yeah,
the group. This guy's, he's loud and obnoxious. This guy's this. So, all those things have to be done on the fly as your mind is calculating every little possible, calculation based upon personalities and all the cues that are coming to you.
yeah, and I think it comes with experience. Because when you first go vegan, you will fight every fight, every chance you have, and as you progress in your vegan journey, you're like, I'm gonna pick my battle today. I'm not in a good spot for me to take this on. I'll just wait till another time.
Yeah, and I'm very careful too about using the term vegan. Again, are you saying plant based? Are you saying plant strong? Are you saying, hey, just like lean into this a little bit more? Again, all that too is something that I take into consideration depending upon, who the audience is.
Yeah, plant-based is definitely softer. Vegan has that activism component to it, which
Yeah.
some people have more resistance to. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. But it's interesting to me how my slant on that has kind of changed a little bit more the longer that I've been doing this. And I now, when I first started doing this, it was really for performance reasons,
hmm
right? It wasn't for health reasons. It wasn't for weight reasons. It was, I want to be the best triathlete that I possibly can. And I believe I can do that, fueling myself with whole plants. And then as I've been going down this path on my journey, and as I have gotten older, as I've, gotten married and had kids, I realize, and as the world has gotten more and more polluted with, the climate crisis, I realize that, that term vegan, it's very powerful. And there is definitely some very strong merit
hmm
to the word and all that it carries with it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as time progresses, yeah, it is getting gaining that much more power.
Yep.
I was listening to one of your TED Talks you had in Austin. And I know you haven't, how long has it been since you stopped being a firefighter? It's been a while, right?
Well, I retired in September of 2009.
Okay. So I think the talk was in 2010, and you shared one of the stats that, you're looking at a house on fire and you thought that's all you're going to do when you're a firefighter, but like 80% of the calls were caused by a fork and a knife. And did you think that that did you think that that helped for the firefighters that you were working with to kind of make the connection that something has to change? And I'm curious if you think that that has changed in society since veganism has gained more popularity as we progressed.
Um, yeah. So just to kind of go back to your question and then kind of reflect on it at the same time. So yes, the vast majority of our calls as firefighters were medical calls, and so we're all emergency first responders, but we're basic EMTs. Some of us were intermediate EMTs, and there were some that were paramedics. But I'll tell you that 95% of the medical calls that we made only required basically basic EMT level stuff. We didn't have to intubate for the most part, give drugs, deliver Narcan to a heroin overdose or something like that. We would wait for the paramedics to come, EMS, emergency medical services. But yes, it was, here's the thing. You have to have the correct goggles on in order to see what you want to see. So yeah, we saw heart attacks and we saw, people that were breathless and pulseless that we needed to thump their chest and try and bring them back to life. We saw people as young as 17 and, as old as in their 70s that basically were in a diabetic coma because their blood sugar levels had gotten too low and they needed basically a shot to bring them back to life if they didn't have a gag reflex. If they had a gag reflex. If they didn't have a gag reflex, we could give them oral glucose and we could bring them back within a matter of minutes. But seeing the diabetics, seeing the cardiovascular disease, seeing the strokes, seeing the Alzheimer's, seeing, with every patient, we always do a history. We say, like, so what meds are you on? What have you had any prior history of, anything? And then we hear all about, yeah, I've had, breast cancer. I've had 2 heart attacks before. I'm on this med, this med, this med, and this med, right? A cocktail of medications. Because I lived the lifestyle and I was like, oh my God, all this is lifestyle created. It's because, as you said, they're basically burying themselves with the spoon, the knife, and the fork. But if I'm not looking for that and I just see somebody with heart disease, somebody with diabetes, I'm not making the connection.
Yeah.
So I don't think most firefighters, most EMS people are thinking, wow, this is because of the standard American diet. They're just thinking, okay, here's a patient with diabetes. What do we got to do to, help them out right now? Here's a person that has had a heart attack. What do we got to do to try and bring them back to life? Right. So now the guys at my station, because we went all in and we started to do this and we talked about it, it was like, wow, can you believe that guy driving that car went into a diabetic, coma and went into that field and into that, telephone pole? Like, wow, did you see the size of him? Right. It's probably because he's got diobesity, which is the combination between diabetes and obesity. Right. Yeah. So to me, it was absolutely self-evident. But I think for a lot of firefighters and EMS, not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a second part to your question, and I don't remember what it was now.
Well, I was going to say, like, I agree, like the lens through which you're looking at it would make a significant difference. The other one was, do you think the number is lower now as we've progressed into plant-based getting more popularity throughout the years?
Do I think what number is lower?
For like cancer and like all the incidents that would be lifestyle related.
I would I would say probably not.
Okay.
I think, you know, we probably have somewhere between 5 to 7% of the population that now is kind of considered vegan, vegetarian, plant-based. And I don't think that's enough to move the needle
Mhm.
on the number of emergency medical calls that we're making as firefighters. I bet you it's still 80% of the call volume is, you know, difficulty breathing, diabetic emergencies, lifting assistance, you know, people that have had a stroke, high blood pressures, all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, we have more work to do, Rip.
Oh, I
That's all
mean,
I say.
yeah,
We got more work to do.
I mean, we're definitely helping people, but I think that you have such a preponderance of um, the pleasure trap that's going on with so many people that don't understand why they're so highly chasing after these hyper palatable foods.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of educating to be done here, and it can't happen fast enough.
Yeah. Definitely there's a lack of connection between how people feel and what they're eating. And you brought up palatable foods. One thing I've heard you talk about often is environment. And I've talked often with Adam Sudd on several shows, like having the proper environment around you to allow you to be successful with this lifestyle. So what does environment look like to you when you mention it? Like what should people be looking for to create for themselves?
Well, it's a great question. And, you know, if it's in the house, it's going to end up in your mouth. And so you want to do everything you can to make sure that you've got an environment at home that makes this whole lifestyle and your success around this lifestyle not about willpower. So if, you know, people that have a big challenge is a house divided where you have a husband or a wife that wants to do this lifestyle, but the other one doesn't. And so
Yeah.
then in your house, you've got the cheese and the butter and the eggs and, you know, the potato chips and the Oreos and all that stuff. So I would say just, you know, keep it drop dead simple and don't have any of the, I'm going to call it contraband
Yeah.
lurking in the fridge or in the cupboards or in the pantry. And then the only decisions that you can make are the healthy ones. And you know, and Dan Buettner with the Blue Zones, you know, I think has shown that, you know, make the easy choice the healthy choice. And so what I would recommend is, you know, have those melons and have that fruit and the watermelon and the cantaloupe and all those things. Like you get home, take 10 minutes and like cut them up and put them in different Tupperware containers so it's easily accessible.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you know, this architecture that you want to create in your life, in your home, that makes the easy choice the healthy choice. And you know, and do the batch cooking on the weekends so you have, you know, everything you need for the week with, you know, the beans and the whole grains or the brown rice or the potatoes. Or, you know, what I do at my house is on Sundays it's always waffle morning or pancake morning on Sundays. And I will make 30 or 40 and then we freeze them. And, you know, we have them for the week. When the kids just want to pop something in the toaster oven, they got that waffle or they got the pancakes or whatever. So a
Yeah.
nice, clean, wholesome environment at home.
And so I have a question for you in that because I've coached we're over 500 members that we've helped transform at this point, and
Nice.
it's very common to see like one partner is vegan, the other that is just not on board with a lifestyle or even a healthy lifestyle for that matter. A lot of the reasons that come up as to like why they can't have the environment that they want to, one would be partner, but second is like, well, I have snacks for the kids in the covers. Um, I uh, I know what I tell them, but I'm curious to hear on your end how you would deal with that scenario.
Well, that's interesting because I have kids. I have 3 kids that are 8, 12, and 15. And we do have some snacks in the pantry that I don't eat. I don't even think about ever touching it. And sometimes we have the like fried chips for the
Mm,
kids, right? Or some of these seaweed like things that you eat, and the third ingredient is oil.
yeah.
There is sometimes there's the smart pop popcorn or something like that, that's just basically junk. And but my kids are they eat so fantastically well that I'm okay with having a little bit of that stuff in the pantry. Um, and my wife will go out and she'll sometimes get the vegan brownies or the vegan cookies for the kids. Um, I don't go there because for me, if I and not with the snacks, I've never been a salty guy, so I don't like salty stuff. But with the brownies and the cookies, I know if I have a bite, I will have the whole thing. And so
Yeah.
I just don't have that one bite. And I'm at a point now where I've been doing this for, I have been doing this for what? Gosh, almost 35 years, to where I've got pretty darn good self-control.
Yeah.
And I don't even call it self-control anymore. It's just like, it'd be like me, somebody I'm out at a party and somebody offering me like a cigarette. And I'm like, no, no, thanks. I don't smoke, or alcohol. It's like, no, thanks. You know what? I don't do alcohol. It's like, no, thanks. I don't do, the vegan brownies. So, I know that's kind of a long-winded answer to, yeah, you gotta find, if you have kids, you want to definitely figure it out. I mean, if what I tell people a lot of times is, depending upon if your kids, see, my kids are so athletic, it's crazy, right? So they are lean, mean fighting machines. But if I had a kid that wasn't working out, and he was 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, I wouldn't have that stuff in the house. I would only have clean, wholesome food. Like, hey, you want to eat something for a snack? Here's the banana, here's an orange, here's the apples. And my kids, they devour all that stuff up, right?
Yeah.
Or like, here's a sliced up watermelon, here's frozen grapes, here's a cantaloupe with, squeeze a bunch of lime and lemon juice over it. That really like helps it out. Here's some really clean, wassa crackers, put a little bit of, spread of peanut butter on it, or almond butter or sunflower seed butter on it. So that's typically what we do most of the time.
Yeah. And it
But I
seems
wanted to be
those,
honest, and say that our house, I mean, we're pure when it comes to being like plant strong, but we have some of the vegan junk food in there.
yeah, I feel like most household will have
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And I think ultimately the kids are just gonna eat whatever's in the house. Like, you're hungry, you eat what's there. You're not gonna starve, right? So if it's healthy options, then it's healthy options that are gonna be eaten.
Yeah, totally.
One thing I want to ask you, because I know you have to go soon. What is the next big project that you're working on at this time?
Well, um, so I don't know if you know or not, but I spent 10 years. So I retired from firefighting in 2009. And then in late 2009, I became a healthy eating ambassador slash partner with Whole Food Market stores. And so I basically went around to almost all the Whole Food Market stores, and I talked to team members. I talked to customers about all the advantages to eating a whole food plant-based diet. I threw medical immersion programs for Whole Food Sickest team members. Uh, we we did a food line that was exclusive to Whole Foods called Engine 2 Plant Strong. And so that was a 10-year contract that I had with Whole Foods. That contract um, ended in January of 2020. And so I have since continued the events. So I still have my major events. I've got my two, I call them now retreats instead of medical immersions, but we have our retreats, the one in Sedona I was talking about. We have one coming up October 10th to the 15th. And then we have one in April in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And then we also have our annual plant stock event that is, we say it's, all the Brock stars of the plant-based movement. And that is now our virtual event. The other two are live. So I got the event side of the business, but the thing that I'm really like spending most of my time with now is the food line. So we've pivoted and we're not called Engine 2 anymore. We're called Plant Strong. And right now we've got 18 different products, and we've got chilies and stews, and we've got broths. We've got whole grain pizza crust kits. We've got cereals, granolas, very, very clean popcorn. So we have all that stuff. And we're in grocery stores. Right now we're in 26 different retailers and 2,300 different doors. So we're in Sprouts and Whole Foods and a bunch of different banners of Kroger, and a bunch of Publix stores, and almost all the natural little mom and pop grocery stores. And then we also do e-commerce. So direct to consumer, which has really taken off. And people now, they understand that and they like the convenience of it. So that has been very, very intense and rigorous, building that business. I've got a whole team now of people that are making that thing come to life. And, I love bringing nutritious, delicious, convenient food to people that are trying to go on this journey, people that are on this journey, and they are looking for food that, wow, you mean I don't have to read the label. I can basically know blindfolded that this is fantastic when it comes to sodium, little to no added sugars, 100% whole grain, 100% plant-based, non-GMO. Almost all of our stuff, not all of it, but almost all of it is organic, and no added oils, which is one of our big tenets, right? We don't want people consuming a lot of processed and refined oils, because it is such a black hole of nutritional nothingness.
And inflammation that comes with it.
Oh my gosh.
So much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Inflammation, and the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s in this country is so absolutely unhealthy right now. Yeah, we could go on and on and on about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
well, I'll put the links to everyone for everything down below, so everyone can kind of check it out. I'll definitely order some of the food. I just relocated back to Canada, so I'm sure you guys ship in Canada too.
We do. The unfortunate thing in Canada is the shipping rates aren't as nearly as favorable.
Yeah, that's all right.
And so, in the States, it's like super reasonable, like, $8 to $12, but in Canada, it's like 4 or 5x that. So it's not at all reasonable, but,
that's all right.
yeah.
I'll still order some. Majority of our listeners in the United States, so they can order it and get really cheap shipping. Rip, I just want to say, I know you have to go soon, but I'll say a massive thank you for taking the time to jump on the show, share your story, provide some value. And I was very excited to hear about your triathlon journey and athletic journey and how that transition was. Because I've never really heard you talk too much about that. It was always about the benefits of plant-based, and we all know that, we talked about it, but I was curious about your journey.
Yeah, no, that was fun. It was a nice little walk down memory lane, talking about the triathlons, because it was such a massive part of my life for really almost 20 years.
Yeah.
When I think about when I started in 1987, and then when I departed in really 2005. Yeah. So thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, same here. And everyone, massive thank you for listening to the show. Again, I'll put all the links in the show note if you want to check out for the food line, all of Rip's platforms. Obviously, his podcast, he has an amazing show. And everyone, thank you very much for listening.